mic. Can you hear me? Darn it. All right, now you can hear me. This means I can't wander all the way through the room. I'm bound by a cord, so. Thank you all so much for coming out this evening. It's really exciting to see so many people here. I anticipate that means we're gonna have a great conversation. So typically in a town hall setting, I don't like to do a lot of introductory talking. I don't really want to give you a pitch or a speech. I want to get right to the good part, which is all the questions. So I'll just say a couple of quick things, which is I am really grateful that you all showed up tonight, that you want to participate in this process, because to me, this is one of the most important things that we can do in a democracy, is bring our community together to talk about the challenges that we face and how we're going to work together to solve those problems. It is the core of how our government is supposed to work. And I don't know about you, but I feel like we've moved pretty far away from that in recent years. And I think we're seeing a lot of negative consequences of moving away from this kind of government. And one of the things that I'm really excited about in this election is the opportunity for us to collectively raise our voices and say enough is enough. We want our country back, we want our government back, and we want our voices to be heard. And that's what events like this are about. So I'm really excited to be here with you. I'm grateful that you showed up to participate. And I hope that you have lots and lots of questions and lots of thoughts that you want to share, because that's what makes events like this so fantastic. And I think I'm gonna stop there and just open the floor to questions.
If y'all want to just raise your hand, I have a mic.
I've seen that ugly commercial on television a dozen times. Could you give us the context around your comments on that, please?
Sure. So, just out of curiosity, how many of you have seen the attack ad John Katko launched against me? Oh, well, he's an effective TV buyer. Okay, so this attack ad, John Katko took a sentence that I said in an answer that I gave in an interview on a podcast. And the question was about Medicare for All, and do I support it, and how would we pay for it? And what I said in my answer to how would we pay for it is, while you would have higher taxes, you would save a lot of money in out-of-pocket expenses. Because under a Medicare for All system, your premiums, your co-pays, your deductibles, your medication costs all come down dramatically, and in some cases disappear. And so if you're looking at the individual or the household level, you save far more money on those costs than you pay in an increased tax. So the household budget makes out better. You end up with more money in your pocket. That's what I said in that interview. What John Katko did was he took the first part of that sentence, while you would pay higher taxes, and he cut it off there. And he changed the word while to well. So it sounds like a complete sentence. Well, you would pay higher taxes. So not only is it out of context, but there's actually a lie in the commercial. But my favorite part of the commercial is when the very serious woman says, "That's right, visiting Professor Balter." And of course, John Katko is trying to do two things by calling me visiting assistant professor. One, he's trying to say she's not one of us. She's not from here. And two, he's using an age-old tactic that unfortunately is used particularly against women candidates very often, of trying to belittle me by minimizing my accomplishments. Frankly, I think that says a lot more about his character than it says anything about me and what I've accomplished in my life. But I know a lot of people are concerned about the visiting part, right? Because I know here in central New York, if you're not born and raised here, You're not quite one of us. I know people, I have friends who've lived here for 50 years who say that they are still treated like outsiders because they weren't born and raised here. So I know this is a concern, it's part of the culture here. And a lot of people have asked me, both before that commercial came up and after that commercial, how do you answer that? What do you say to, but you came from Connecticut, which is true, I did, I grew up in Connecticut, loved it there. I moved to Syracuse in 2003. My answer to that is, I am not a Central New Yorker by accident of birth. I chose to live here. I chose to make this my home because I love it here. I love everything about this region. I love the people, I love the history, I love the nature, I even love the winters, which is something not a lot of natives can say, by the way. And so I decided to make this my home, and I bought a house, and I am a Central New Yorker. And the reason that I want to run for Congress is because I want to do everything I possibly can to make Central and Western New York a better place for all of us.
Hi, Dana. Thank you for having an open, unscripted town hall speak. My name is Paul McKinney. I have spent my adult life in education with kids, and seldom is education a topic that's discussed. Could you give us a few of your viewpoints as to where we are in public education and possibly some ideas you have for improving?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for being in education. I think that education is one of the most important responsibilities of government. As a country, as a government, it is something that we owe to our kids, we owe to ourselves, to prepare the next generation to be successful. And I think it's really important that we consider what we mean when we say successful. One purpose of education is to prepare kids for the workforce, right? We need the next generation of workers to grow up and take jobs and keep the economy moving. But that's only one of the purposes of education. Another really important purpose of education that I don't think we talk about enough in this country is we have to raise up the next generation of democratic citizens. We need to teach our kids what it means to be a citizen in a democracy. And that's what we're all doing here, right? We need to make sure that our kids understand that they have a voice that matters in this society, and that we are equipping them with the skills they need to exercise that voice. Because if we want democracy to continue to be strong and healthy, it is up to each of us to nurture it. We gotta teach our kids how to do that. I think that the government should be providing educational opportunities of the highest quality to every child in this country from the age of 3 all the way through post-secondary education. And that means at 3 and 4, universal pre-K. Every child in this country should be able to go to a high-quality pre-kindergarten program without cost, because we know that pre-K is one of the best tools we have to level the playing field for kids who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, and it has a long-term impact on their academic success. So we've got to make it available to everybody. We've already agreed K through 12 is a public obligation. We got a lot of work to do to make that better and make it more equitable, because right now the quality of your education depends on your zip code, and that is wrong. And we have to change the way we fund our schools so that the quality of your education is no longer tied to your zip code. But we also need to extend our commitment to public education to post-secondary education. And that can look like a number of different things. For some students, that's going to be college or university, a 4-year school. For some students, it's going to be community college, a 2-year degree program. For other students, it's going to be vocational and technical training, which we need to invest a lot more in this country, because we don't have nearly, you want to talk about job training and workforce preparation, We don't have nearly enough people with the skills we need to fill all the jobs we have, especially as we start expanding our investments in infrastructure over the next 10, 20, 30 years. We don't have nearly enough people to fill those jobs to rebuild our roads and bridges and electrical grids and water systems. So we've got to get people into voc tech programs. And we have to make sure that there are debt-free and public options for all of those post-secondary possibilities so that every child can afford to access them. And that's sort of my overview on what I think the government obligation to education is.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Hello. I wanted to ask you your thoughts on a subject that I rarely hear much talk about. What's your opinion on the federal debt and what can possibly be done about it?
Yeah. So, my opinion on the federal debt is that it's too high. And it's the path that we are on with regard to debt is completely unsustainable, right? We can get away with it for a little while longer, but eventually the economy will collapse, and it won't just be our national economy, it'll be the world economy, because this is all interconnected. So we cannot keep racking up this kind of debt. It is unsustainable. One of the things we have to do is when we talk about all these great programs that we want to offer, like I just talked about universal pre-K and debt-free college, those are great things. How the hell are we going to pay for it, right? We can't just keep spending money. We have to be bringing in money to pay for those things. There are some pretty simple things we could do to generate a lot of revenue for the government to pay for those things. I would start by not passing a tax bill that adds $1.9 trillion to our national debt. I think that what John Katko and his colleagues did with that bill is give a giant gift to corporate America, a giant gift to the wealthiest people in this country. And the ones who are going to pay for it is everybody else, the rest of us. They tried to sort of fake us out that this was good for us by giving us maybe an extra $20 in our paychecks, right? Or in some cases, $1.60 a week. Do you remember that, Paul Ryan? This waitress gets an extra $1.60 a week, so it's good for her. But what they don't talk about is that 1.9 trillion that they added to the debt, right? And the reason they did that, or the reason they weren't worried about that, is that then they turn around and say, so now we're gonna cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid to pay for that $1.9 trillion. So not only are they giving all this money and all these benefits to the wealthiest people, but at the same time, they are cutting the safety net and support programs that help everybody else and that other people actually depend on for survival, right? So it's kind of a double whammy. So I think the first thing we need to do is be responsible in the way we approach tax policy and make sure that the wealthiest people in this country are paying their fair share and that corporations are paying their fair share. So cutting the corporate tax rate to 21% is ridiculous. And I think it's really important that we not let people like John Katko get away with saying, no, we had to do that because our corporate tax rate was the highest in the world and it made us completely non-competitive in business. That is baloney. The corporate tax rate on the books was 35%. No corporation in this country paid 35% because our tax code is full of loopholes. And when you look at what we actually pay in taxes, the United States, compared to all of the other OECD countries, all of the other countries that we consider sort of our colleagues and peers, we are in the bottom third of the list in the amount of taxes that we pay. We are not at the top. And it's because that 35% is on paper only. When you account for all of the loopholes and you get these big time accountants in there and lawyers in there working to make sure you dodge as much of the tax load as you possibly can. Many of the largest corporations in this country actually pay $0 in income tax. 0. We're not talking about 35% or 21%. We are talking about nothing. So, the answer is not to give them more. The answer is to close all of those loopholes so that the corporations are paying what they are actually supposed to be paying. Because, by the way, they benefit from the things that those taxes pay for. How do you think they're shipping their goods across the country to sell them to customers? On roads that our tax dollars pay for. How are they hiring their employees? How do they find employees who are prepared for those jobs? Because they were prepared by schools that our tax dollars pay for. Those corporations are benefiting from tax dollars, and they should be contributing to those things as well. So we've got to close those loopholes. We've got to bring home the money that is stashed overseas, right? Corporate profits stashed overseas so they can avoid taxes. We, the American taxpayer, are owed $750 billion in taxes on that money right now. The GOP put a provision in this tax bill that said we're going to repatriate that money, we're going to bring it home, but they gave them a $400 billion break. So instead of collecting $750 billion, we're going to collect $350 billion. I want the other $400 billion. I want to invest that in infrastructure, right? We need $1 trillion infrastructure investment to get that program started. Well, let's bring back that $750 billion, and while we're at it, let's put a small transaction tax on Wall Street transactions. Tiny tax. Nobody will feel any pain from this tax. It will raise us $250 billion. You add that to the $750 billion, and voila, there's our $1 trillion for infrastructure, right? We have to be talking about how we're going to raise revenue, and we got to be doing it responsibly. And that is how we are going to be able to get the programs we need without increasing the debt, and that is how we're going to be able to raise money to pay down the debt. Other questions?
I don't quite know how to ask this, but it has to do with regulations, how people say, oh, we hate the government because of the regulations. And right now, all the regulations seem to be thrown out the window, and terrible things are going to happen. And I remember my father mentioning to me when I was a child, the wise restraints that make men free. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Sure. We have a culture in this country of demonizing government, right? Government's bad. We need smaller government. We need less government. Government is wasteful. Government is inefficient. It's a terrible culture. It's a terrible thing story that we tell ourselves and we tell our kids. And I think what we need to do, those of us who believe that government can do really good things for us, we need to talk about that. We need to tell that story. I believe that government is, can be, should be, and is a force for good in our country and in our lives. And we need to support policy that demonstrates that, right? That upholds that ideal. To people who say that regulation is inherently a bad thing, I would ask, how many of you brushed your teeth this morning? Feel free to raise your hand even if you didn't. Right? How many of you used toothpaste when you brushed your teeth this morning? How many of you were killed by your toothpaste? Guess why? Government regulation. Government is what makes sure that you can use your toothpaste without fear of dying from it. Government is what makes sure that when you turn on your faucet, water comes out. And with a few exceptions, like the travesty that has been happening in Flint, that the water that comes out is safe for you to drink. Government is what makes sure that mail arrives to your house every day, even when you live in central New York and there's 18 feet of snow on the ground, right? And it's been snowing for 6 days. All of those things are done by government. Government regulation is why we can take a deep breath without coughing. it is doing good things for us every day. And to suggest that by definition regulation is bad is just wrong. It is either intentional to stoke fear and resentment, or it's out of ignorance and not understanding what government really does. And either way, it's a problem, and we have to tell the real story, right? I went to public high school. I got a great education at a public high school. That's government. It's government regulation that ensured that I couldn't graduate high school without taking a foreign language, or I couldn't graduate high school without learning how to read and write, or pick your academic regulation of choice, right? Those are the things that government does for us, and they matter, and they are part of what enable us to pursue success, right? One of the things that is so great about being in our democracy, in our capitalist democracy, is that we each get to decide for ourselves what success looks like, and then we get to go after it. But government regulation, that sets up the rules of the game. That ensures that everybody gets a fair shot. And when not everybody has a fair shot, it's because the regulation isn't working well enough, and we've got to fix it. And that's what we should be doing, not undoing it. We should be making it work better.
So I know as a freshman representative, you wouldn't have a huge amount of say in what committees you sat on, but what committees do you think you would like to sit on in the House?
So for a couple more months, I'm gonna operate under the delusion that I'm gonna get to do whatever I want when I go to Washington. So I've played this game. What committee will you sit on? So I would like to serve on 3 committees. I would like to serve on health, education, and workforce, because for a couple of reasons. One, I think those are issues that are central to all of our lives. They're issues where we have the potential to do a lot of good for a lot of people. And they are areas where I have a lot of policy expertise. So I feel like I could make a really valuable contribution to developing policy in those areas. I would like to serve on the Agriculture Committee because our district is an agricultural district. And I think that Central and Western New Yorkers deserve to have a representative who is at the table when seminal policy decisions in agriculture are being made. I think our voices need to be represented there. I'm really sick of having us be an afterthought to other people, and I want to be at the table so that our needs are in the discussion from the beginning. And for a similar reason, the 3rd committee that I would sit on is infrastructure, transportation and infrastructure, because the infrastructure needs that we have are tremendous. The infrastructure investments that are coming are going to be really big. And I think it's critically important to our region, not only because we need to fix our roads and bridges and replace our water systems, but also that's going to be one of the keys to economic revitalization for our region, is all of these projects that are going to bring with them great jobs. And I want to make sure that, again, we have a seat at the table as we're building those plans, and that principles that we really care about are included in those infrastructure policies. For example, requirements for local hiring. Because it's not going to work as an economic revitalization tool if we contract with companies from across the country who import their labor and then leave, right? They're taking all the money with them. We need those benefits to stay here in our community. And those are the kinds of things that I want to make sure are happening as the policy's being put together. So those are the 3 that I have my sights set on right now. Sure.
I'm 70 years old, and I look around the room, and I'm not the only one of a certain age, I think, amongst us here this afternoon. I've also noticed that in some of the high-profile upsets across the Northeast recently, a lot of the energy has come from young voters who are demanding change, and this is less a policy question than a strategy question. I was wondering, what are you and your campaign doing to energize young voters? We're part of Oswego is a college town. Syracuse is a college town. How can you get young voters working for you and bring that energy to your campaign?
All right, well, I'm gonna start that answer with a question. Do we have any young voters in the house? Woohoo! So how come you're here? Okay. And how did you hear about this?
Found out through our political science department. Members of the campaign had reached out to faculty to reach out to us. Oh, thank you. Members of faculty reached out to us after representatives had reached out to them, and it was also just a matter of mobilizing more students on campus to get involved, who had plenty of ideas, who really wanted that experience to actually get to participate, especially with everything going on around us.
And there you go. All you gotta do is say, hey, come on in. Right? We have tons and tons of young people, young voters, and people who are not yet of voting age working on this campaign. We have made a concerted effort to reach out. Now that school is back in session, that's going to be happening more and more and more. We have a field organizer devoted specifically to college and university campuses. We have a fellowship program for students to work on this campaign, to build campaign experience, because we need to build the pipeline of people working in politics. And we have a lot of volunteers. And when I say people not yet of voting age, we have kids as young as middle school working on this campaign. Way back, I don't even remember, time runs together for me, sorry, but maybe 4 or 5 months ago, we did a house party, and there were a couple of young women there, one of whom asked me a question about gun safety. And we talked about that for a little while, and then after the event was over, she and her friend who were sitting together came up and said, we'd really like to volunteer on your campaign, can we do that? And I said, sure. We have lots of volunteer opportunities. I described a couple of the things that they might do, and I said, do you have your own car? Because that makes it a lot easier to volunteer. She looked at me and she said, I'm in 7th grade. Which first made me feel really old. But then got me unbelievably excited, right? 11 and 12 and 13-year-old kids saying, I want to do this. I want to make my voice heard. I believe in what you're talking about. I believe in what you're doing, and I want to help make it happen, right? And those are kids who can't vote yet. These are people who can vote. And so we are making a concerted effort to reach out, but I think it's really important for all of us to recognize that we don't have to go, this is not like pulling teeth, right? As you said, people have ideas and things that they want to do. They just need to know what's the channel open to me to do it. And I think, in the post-Parkland, Florida massacre time, we saw high school students rise up across the country in a way we hadn't seen before, or certainly not in decades. And that's still going strong. And I live in Syracuse, the high school students in Syracuse have organized their own organization called Syracuse Students for Change, and they are getting heavily involved in politics. They organized their own town hall, they organized the March for Our Lives. They had 3,000 people show up at that march. It's amazing. And so, we are reaching out to them, but they're also reaching out to us, and we will continue to do that. We're also making sure that kids are getting registered as they come of age. And my pitch is always, I want you to vote for me, but no matter who you vote for, you gotta show up and vote. And one of the things that's really exciting for young people, I hope you guys all spread this message, although you're not millennials, right? You're the next generation. Okay, I really am old. So the message that I'm trying to send to millennials, but you guys can hop on the tail end of that. There are now more millennials of voting age than there are baby boomers. Wow. That's a big wow. That is a massive shift in our demographics. And what that means is if young people show up to vote, they get to run the show. They get to decide what's on the agenda. So all the things we have failed to act on for years that they care about, climate disruption, student debt, gun safety, if they show up, those things go to the top of the list, right? They have the power because they have the numbers. It's up to them to exercise it. And that is a message that I think is very powerful and motivating to young people to get involved because it shows them what weight their voice carries. So spread that around and encourage. But I think we're going to see young people coming out in massive numbers this year.
Hi, Dana.
Hi.
The first time I heard you speak, I asked you if you were going to be tough enough to go to Washington and face those Republicans and others. So my question is still, are you going to be tough enough? And number two, as a new member of Congress, hopefully, and as a woman, I'd like to hear a little bit more about women's issues, how you feel about what's happening with women today and what might happen.
Okay. So on the first question, am I tough enough? The answer is pretty simple, yes. I think that oftentimes people confuse toughness with meanness. And I reject the notion out of hand that in order to be tough, in order to be assertive, in order to be accomplished, and in order to get the job done, you need to be mean. Not only is that wrong, it's far less effective. And I guess this connects to the question about women, and I'm going to apologize in advance to the men in the room. One of the reasons that our government isn't working well enough is we don't have enough women there. And this notion of toughness is really based in masculinity. And what that gets us is a lot of gridlock, a lot of unnecessary, unending war, and a lot of ego competition. And what we really need is a lot of civil discourse, a lot of compromise, a lot of creative problem solving, a lot of empathy, and a lot of persistence. So I think in the big picture, what we've got to do right now, only 19% of the seats in Congress are held by women. We got to break the 50% barrier. And when we do, our world will change. We're not going to get there this election. We're going to make a big dent in it, but we're not going to get all the way there. By the way, I just read something, can't remember what outlet it was in, maybe Politico. This year, we have the potential to elect over 100 women to Congress, which has never happened before. And 20 to 40 winnable seats are campaigns run by women. So it could be as many as 40 or more new women in Congress in one election. It's extraordinary. And I think that's important not only because of the characteristics that I mentioned, but also because a lot of important issues don't get on the agenda when women aren't making the agenda. And that's something that has to change, right? So right now, we are watching these confirmation hearings unfold with Kavanaugh and the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. And it's sort of an extraordinary thing that we're seeing. First of all, this is a man who, through his own words and his own writings, has demonstrated an immense hostility to not only women's rights, but LGBTQ rights and workers' rights, disability rights. There isn't a set of civil rights that won't be at risk if and when he is confirmed. And that is troubling beyond belief. But on top of that, what we've seen come out this week is evidence that he's committed perjury. And yet we're still talking about confirming him to the Supreme Court. And it looks like a foregone conclusion, right? But we saw evidence this week that he has perjured himself. Not to mention that the president who has nominated this man to sit on the court is an unindicted co-conspirator in federal crime. And the next justice on the Supreme Court is likely to be a judge sitting and ruling on the president's own case. We don't allow defendants to pick their judges, right? He's not a defendant yet, but based on the evidence that exists, it is likely that there will be a case in which he is named. And this confirmation is going forward. And on top of all of that, only, 3% of his records have been made public. 3%. Everything else is being hidden. And never mind, the person who's deciding what to hide is a private attorney, not somebody who works for the government, and just happens to be a private attorney at the law firm where Donald Trump's private attorney works. This whole circumstance is problematic. Sorry, a little off the topic. This is the What's Bothering Dana This Week portion of the show. So, yes, I think we need more women's voices there, but we have to worry about it. So the threat to women's rights that Kavanaugh's appointment to the Supreme Court demonstrates shows us something really important, I think. And this, again, applies not just to women's rights, but all the things we're concerned about. We can't put all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak, because something is about to happen at the federal level that's going to make life a lot harder for us. We have to also be working at the state level, right? Here in New York State, we have to make sure that the Reproductive Health Act passes, because then New York State can be a bulwark for us against what's happening at the federal level. And that's not enough, because we need to protect those rights for every woman in the country. But when we can't control that, we can work much harder here to make sure that at least everybody in New York State gets that protection, right? And I think we have to keep raising our voices, not just as women, but as allies of women, to make sure that it happens. And that's also why, by the way, I think it's important that when John Katko uses a sexist tactic in his advertising, we call him out for it. Because in the grand scheme of things, we want to compare that ad to Roe v. Wade. It's nothing. But all those little nothings are why we have the big fights to fight. And so I think at every step of the way, we got to call that stuff out. Got to call it for what it is, and we have to demand the kind of respect that we deserve.
Hello. So I actually am one of your fellows. I recently kind of worked on all that. So I want to try and do as much as I can to make a change and to fight for these rights that for some reason we still have to fight for. But I want to ask, what can we do to really push for these rights? What can we do to make sure that these rights aren't taken away from us, that we should just be guaranteed in the first place?
So I think the point of we should just be guaranteed in the first place is a really good one. And the notion that in 2018 we are still having these fights is outrageous, and it's exhausting. So I would say the first thing is to try and put aside the outrage and the exhaustion, because that will sap your energy. And that's part of the strategy of the opposition, right? Is to tire you out so you give up. So the first thing is to do whatever you need to do to protect yourself so that you have the energy to keep fighting. And the second thing is to keep fighting and to fight like hell until you get what you're owed. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about what's happened in the last year and a half, if I try to find the good things about having Donald Trump in office, there are not many. But one really good thing about having him in office is this, right? How many of you did this 2 years ago? There's one. Anybody else? 2, 3, 4. All right. 4 people. The rest of us, we're doing this because we suddenly realize that there's threat around us. By the way, it was there before Donald Trump. We just either didn't notice it or didn't think it mattered to us. But it's always been there. And there are lots of people in this country who will tell you that their daily life experience shows them that it has always been there. So we have to keep raising our voices, right? And that's why I keep telling people this November election is critically important. And I hope that all of you are choosing a candidate that you support. Again, I hope that's me. But even if it's not me, whoever you choose to support, I hope that that means you're not only voting for that person, but you are working on the campaign. You are knocking on doors, you are making phone calls, you are stuffing envelopes, you are writing postcards, whatever the campaign tells you they need you to do to help them win, because voting is not enough. That's the first thing. But the second thing is to realize that November 6th is not the end. November 6th is just the beginning. I know it feels like the end of something really, really, really long. It is the end of something really, really, really long. But it's only the beginning of the fight. We are going to win this election in November. We are going to take back the 24th district. We are going to flip the House of Representatives and maybe even the Senate. And that's going to be amazing. But we can't take a break then, because all of those people that we put in office need our voices behind them, writing letters, making phone calls, showing up at their office, demanding that they do A, what they promised they were going to do when they asked for our vote, and B, all the other things that we want them to do that we didn't talk to them about in the first place, right? That's how we get them to do it, is by forcing them to. So the vote is really, really important. That's sort of the definitive way to make your voice heard, but it's only one piece of it. And I'm hoping that you send me to Washington. But when I'm in Washington on the floor of the House, I need to be able to go there and say, 50,000 of my constituents called me about this issue. We have to pass this law. That's what matters. So you have to keep raising your voice. And I think probably the most effective way to do it is to pick one issue that you really care about and fight like hell for that one issue. And trust that there are going to be other people fighting for the other issues. Because none of us can do it all, but all of us can do it all.
Russia. The intelligence community has stated categorically that Russia has and is still interfering in our democracy. What do you think is an appropriate response, both from the government, on a government level? What should they be doing to protect us, and direct response to Russia?
Yeah. I can start with what an adequate response is not. An adequate response is not holding a summit with Vladimir Putin and a press conference where you publicly on the world stage dismiss and denigrate your own intelligence community and instead kowtow to a dictator who has launched cyber warfare against your own country. That's what you don't do. Unfortunately, that's what our president did. There are a bunch of things we have to do here, right? We need to hold Russia accountable, so that takes us to sanctions. I think that's the place where we start. this back and forth between Donald Trump and Congress about sanctions is outrageous. The fact that he does not want to implement sanctions, he doesn't want to strengthen sanctions, he wants to let them off the hook, essentially, is outrageous. The fact that our own congressman, when he was asked about that in an interview, said, "I'm not sure that the Senate ever passed that sanctions bill, did they?" That was John Katko's answer to why haven't you said anything to Donald Trump about sanctions. So that's, the piece of holding Russia accountable. And that's really important. But I think what makes me even more upset is that our government hasn't done anything to safeguard the 2018 elections. And we have indisputable evidence that they messed with the last election, but we also have indisputable evidence that they are currently messing with this election. And that is ongoing cyber warfare, right? It's not that we were victims of cyber attacks, we are. And so they have attacked our democracy, they've attacked our country, they've attacked our citizens, they've stolen personal information. This is serious, and we need to deal with it. And I'm sure you all remember seeing the story in the paper last year. Congress had allocated all this money for securing the elections, and then the executive branch didn't actually spend any of it. They didn't do anything. So we need to enhance election security. One of the things, this is not an area of expertise of mine. This is something I never really thought that I would have to know about, but I've been reading about. And what the experts say is the first thing that we should do is have a paper trail for our voting process, right? We need paper ballots so that we can properly audit our votes. And that's the second piece, is we need to do a regular program of auditing to make sure that everything is being recorded as it should be. I was really, really upset I don't know if you've seen in the Syracuse Post-Standard, they've been asking me and John Katko a question every week. And then we submit an answer of 250 words or less, and they print these answers. And one of them was about what would you do to secure the 2018 elections. And John Katko said in his answer, "I support increased funding for election security." That article was published 5 days after John Katko voted against increased funding for election security. So I'm not really sure what he's thinking or where he stands. I know that yet again, his answer does not match his actions. But this is a very serious thing, and we need to pass that funding. That funding went down on party lines. The Democrats voted for it, the Republicans voted against it. I don't understand why. I really don't understand what the justification is. But we've got to do that. We have to invest in the things that we know will help us secure our elections, and it starts with paper ballots.
Thank you. Hi Dana, how are you?
Hi, good, how are you?
I have a quick question for you. So I'm a student at Syracuse University. Our cost of attendance is almost $70,000 this year. Federal loans are between 4 and 7% interest rates. Why are they that high? Why don't we reduce them down to just a fraction of what they're borrowing from?
Yeah, I think we should reduce them. I think those rates are outrageous. I can't give you what I think the sweet spot of a rate is because I don't have adequate information, right? And I need to read analyses and learn a lot more about it. But I know after I was done with school and started paying back my loans, I was able to lock in a rate of about 2.5%. By the way, still paying loans. So I think the kind of rates that you're talking about are outrageous. One of the things that has happened under Betsy DeVos that's really upsetting is a return to the predatory loan practices in student borrowing, which, it's just so obvious the things that we should be protecting people from. That's one of them, not just in student loans, but across the board, but she's reintroducing this in student loans. I don't think the government should be able to make profit off of student loans. So we've got to deal with that. But we need to also go further than that, which is make sure that there are debt-free college options, right? Now that doesn't mean that any school you want to go to, you can go to debt-free, right? I'm not saying that a $70,000 a year tuition needs to be provided to you by the government. But there need to be debt-free options for people, and we have to look at ways to deal with the debt relief problem. Another thing that this administration has sort of rolled back and cut back on are the debt forgiveness programs that are so great, right? The idea that you devote 5 years to working in a high-need school district as a teacher and your student loan is forgiven, right? So you get to work off the loan, and the community that desperately needs really qualified workers get them. It's a win-win situation. Those kinds of programs are great. We should be expanding those, right? We should be creating more opportunities like that in high-need communities around the country. This administration is getting rid of them. So I think there's a lot of pieces to this that we have to do, but bringing down interest rates is sort of an easy one.
Thank you.
Sure.
I've heard a lot of things come out of your mouth today that are sound bites that would seem to me to be perfect for ads. Things like John Katko's actions and words are inconsistent. Can you get a little tougher in your ads? Not meaner, but tougher?
So we will have a whole series of ads coming out. Our third ad just came out this weekend, and it's on taxes. We will have a whole series of ads, and I'll just encourage you to remember that TV ads are only one part of a communication strategy. There's TV ads, there's print mail, there's internet ads, there's press coverage, there's radio. So all of those things are working together. So you're probably not going to hear all of the messages you want to hear in any one medium, but the point, there's really 2 points behind the communications plan, right? One is to hold John Katko accountable, to talk about, as we did in the tax ad, he voted to give 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. He voted to do that by adding $1.9 trillion to the debt, and now they're trying to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid to pay for it, right? That's the message of the tax ad. So those kinds of messages holding him accountable. The other side of the communications plan is putting forward the proactive agenda that I stand for and the things that we want to do. And that's talking about making sure that everybody has access to health care, and making sure that our neighborhoods are safe for our kids to play in, making sure that kids have good schools to go to, and all of those sorts of things. So it's a combination of the two. I think where you will see sort of the most direct and harshest, I'm not sure that's quite the right word, but the kind of thing that I think you're looking for will be in published statements and in the debates. Because I think one of the challenges when your communication is sort of, you put up your ad and then they put up their ad, and then you put out your statement and they put out their statement. You lose the immediacy of being able to really hold them accountable, right? So what I want to be able to do, what I need to be able to do, is be side by side with John Katko on a stage, and when he says, I support increased funding for election security, I can say, excuse me, you just voted against that, so let's be honest, right? We need to do that face to face, and that's why debates are so important. That's why joint interviews and joint town halls are so important. Not surprisingly, he isn't too keen on the whole appearing with me in public thing. Right now, we are arguing over a debate schedule. And you may have seen this covered in the Auburn Citizen over the last couple of days. His proposal was for 4 televised debates in Syracuse the last week of the election. Yes. I don't think that's good enough. I think people in all 4 counties should have the opportunity to be present for debates. I think there should be debates in front of live audiences. I think there should be debates over a period of a month or so that people have time to listen and digest and evaluate. So I gave a proposal to him that reflected that, which he flat out rejected. So now we are in the process of trying to come to some kind of understanding. I would encourage you to feel free to express your opinions to your local press, to the congressman's campaign, to my campaign, about what you think a debate schedule should look like. And maybe if we get enough pressure, we can get some real events. But I think that face-to-face conversation is the most important place to do that, holding him to account, because he can't run away from that, right? Instead, what he does is he lobs nastiness from the safety of his office, right? Like that commercial calling me a visiting assistant professor. Instead of dealing with the issue, he's distracting with an insult. Not unlike some other folks that we're familiar with.
Would you want to consider an ad on television where you challenge to a debate? One of your commercials?
Frankly, probably not, because ads are very expensive, and you are limited as to the number that you can run. If I had $8 million in the bank, sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a good 100 people here. Let's get together 8 million and we'll be all set.
Like many people in this room, I have an anti-Trump malady that will probably lead to counseling or medication at some point. But I want to ask you a serious question, because it's being discussed among Democratic candidates nationally, which is how much of your focus should be against the Trump agenda, which I think infuriates probably everybody in this room, and how much of it should be positive messaging. I think one of the challenges for the Democrats is to have a simple message, which Trump, you have to give him credit, had. I mean, it's based on hatred and intolerance and misogyny and bigotry and all sorts of things. But people understand where he's coming from. Democrats tend to often be policy wonks, and the message gets blurred and so forth. I'm sure you've thought about that, and I'm just wondering what your thinking is. I'm not asking for a binary choice, this or that, but how you approach this in terms of a strategy for campaigning.
So first of all, I just want to put in a plug for policy wonks. We're not bad people. I'd like to see more of us in government, frankly. But I think, so at the end there you said I'm not asking for a binary choice. I think that's really important. One of the things that we have been fed for many, many years is a false choice. You can either have somebody who's relatable, or you can have somebody who's smart and competent and knows about policy. In fact, we can have both, we deserve both, and we should be demanding both. And we don't have enough of that in our government right now, so we need to get some more. I think you are right that Republicans are much better at that game than Democrats are as a party. We really like to educate people, and as an educator, I understand the impulse to educate people, but you're not going to educate folks out of their vote. It doesn't work. We see that it doesn't work. What the Republicans are really good at doing is hitting people in their gut, right? Communicating with them at the level of emotion. And we as a party, Democrats, have to get better at that. My approach in this race is to, which I think is successful really no matter the circumstance, is to meet people where they are. I think one of the mistakes we make is to assume that one approach is going to work with everybody, because it doesn't. We're different from each other. And I think that if you look at politics the way I do, which is really about personal connection, you have to be not only willing but able to connect with different people differently. And that doesn't mean changing your positions, right? I will never be dishonest about where I stand on the issues. I will never say what I think somebody wants to hear to get what I want out of them. That's just not who I am. But it doesn't mean that I have the same conversation with every person that I talk to, because the people that I'm talking to have different concerns. And I think where we miss the mark is by, instead of listening to people, talking at them. So my first instinct always is to ask a question. What's important to you? What issue matters the most to you? And then talk about that. And try always to be talking about it in a way that connects with the person that I'm talking to. Some people really want to get in the weeds on policy. I love that. Some people, the minute a number comes out of your mouth, their eyes glaze over, right? So that's not going to work with them. Some conversations I have in this district are all about Donald Trump. People who are probably suffering from the same affliction you are, wanting to talk only about Donald Trump and the threat he poses to democracy, to the world, to our safety. I can have that conversation for hours, right? I'm there with you. We're gonna be on the same medication. For some people, that doesn't even register as a relevant issue in their lives. Why? Because they are so concerned with getting food on the table and keeping the roof over their heads, what's happening in the White House doesn't matter. And if I'm talking to them about that, I am completely ignoring the reality of their lives. And they don't care about somebody who's going to deal with Donald Trump. They care about somebody who's going to help them find a job that can support their family. And so honestly, that is my approach. It is about finding out what matters to the people that I'm talking to and engaging with them on that, no matter what that is. And sometimes that means saying, you know what, I don't know, but I'd really like to find out. And if you're willing to spend 15 minutes talking to me, it will help me learn what I need to learn so that we can figure this out together. And sometimes it means being taken totally by surprise by a question that I have never heard before, which is unusual at this point, but it happens every once in a while. And that's kind of cool too, because then it's, you know, a new thing to go learn about. But I think this trying to put a template over everybody is where we go wrong in our politics. I agree with you, Donald Trump was very successful. I reject the idea that that's the only way to be successful.
Could you speak about federal minimum wage and a living wage for kids, people trying to support their families?
Yes, what do you mean by a living wage for kids?
Well, just a living wage in general.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm in, Josh, can you come up here with the mic next? I'm in full support of the notion of a living wage. The minimum wage should be a living wage. No person who works full-time should be struggling to make ends meet. Simple as that. It becomes more challenging the larger your family is. And what I support in terms of federal policy is increasing to a $15 minimum wage that is indexed to inflation. Because one of the problems that we've seen, you know, we've had minimum wage for a long time, but then we don't raise the minimum wage for a long time, and so costs go up, but wages stay stagnant, and you end up with less money in your pocket. So we've got to index the minimum wage to inflation, so at the very least, it keeps up with inflation. Now, $15 minimum wage nets you about $32,000 a year. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's enough to get by. And I think that should be where we start. I also think that at the same time we are pursuing a living wage, we need to be pursuing other policies like Medicare for All that will reduce and or eliminate some of the highest cost of living components that families are dealing with. So if all of a sudden you have a $15 minimum wage and no out-of-pocket healthcare costs, now we've made a really big difference in your ability to survive. And that's why I think we've got to look at these policies as connected to each other, and not think about pursuing one thing at a time. Yeah.
Okay, hi Dana. I hope this doesn't get complicated. I want to go back to something you said earlier. You are not old. We are not old. Methuselah was old.
Point taken.
All right. One of the things that really bothers me about John Katko is his use of the word bipartisan. I really wish he would get that out of his vocabulary, or somebody buy him a dictionary so he can look the damn word up. And mostly it's the bi part. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having that argument about when to debate, and you might even have showed up tonight. With that, we kind of know what he means or doesn't mean by bipartisanism, but talk to me about Dana Balter and bipartisanism as a candidate and as a congresswoman.
Okay. So I think about bipartisanship as working with the opposing party, right? Democrats and Republicans working together. In Congress, what that looks like to me is walking into the job with the mindset that we will only make progress through compromise. It is understanding that because of the way our government is set up, we have to work together with people that we disagree with. By the way life is set up, we have to work together with people that we disagree with. But it's built into our system of government, and for good reason. Now, it's gotten very dysfunctional, but there's good reason to have that built into the system. So we need to reinvigorate it and try and make it healthy again. I think there are a few different things to keep in mind. For me, the best way to approach working with somebody that you disagree with is to start by putting aside the things you disagree on and focusing on the things you agree on. So the example I use all the time is gun policy, because this tends to be a very hot button issue, right? Emotions get heated very quickly. And we may have very different ideas about what good gun policy looks like. But I bet all the money in my very tiny piggy bank that we all want our kids to come home safe at the end of the day. So let's start there. And the reason I think that's important, you could say, yeah, but that's not going to get us anywhere in policy. That's true, that's not a policy. But I think it's important to start there, because what it does is it allows us or encourages us or maybe even forces us to recognize how much we have in common, to build a little bit of trust in each other and a little bit of respect for each other. And that gives us the foundation we need to then be able to tackle the more difficult parts where we disagree. I think that trust and respect is what we have lost from our politics. We immediately jump to the conclusion that the other side is bad, that their motives are bad, and we can't make progress from there. So we have to get back to that respect and trust. And I think focusing on the things we agree on is the way to do that. Then when we get to the point of disagreement, the whole thing doesn't have to collapse, right? We can just take a step back, we can revisit the agreement and start again. It also requires us, and this is the part of it that I think people don't like to face, it requires us to be willing to take less than perfect. And I think particularly for those of us who feel really passionately about the issues, really passionately about the things we want to do and the things we want to see happen, it is hard to be willing to let go of that. But we can't get everything that we want, and we have to be willing to always keep in mind the big goal, but take smaller steps along the way to get there. And that, again, it's part of the nature of how our government is set up to work. It's incredibly frustrating, especially when you are 100% sure that your goal is right, as we all are. But it's the only way that it works. And so those to me are the really important pieces of being able to work in a truly bipartisan way in Congress. In terms of campaigning, there's sort of two components to it. I'm not interested in being bipartisan with John Katko. I want to beat him. And frankly, I don't want to have to take the time to teach him what it means first. So, where bipartisanship comes into play in the campaign is with voters, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, this campaign is not for Democrats. This campaign is for Central and Western New Yorkers. I am not campaigning to be the representative of the Democrats who live in this district. I am running for office to serve all of the people who live in this district, including every single person who disagrees with me. And that's one of the reasons why it is critically important to me that events like this are open to the public. That there are no tickets, there is no screening of questions, there is no limit on who is allowed to come in here and who is allowed to raise their hand and speak up. My staff is not going to shut somebody down if they disagree with me, or if when I give an answer they say, wait a minute, I don't buy that, I need to ask you another question. That's what these discussions are supposed to be for. And what I find everywhere I go in this district is that no matter how much we sort of come with our preconceived notions demonizing each other, people are pretty damn good. And they actually like each other. And they actually feel this sense of community, even with people of different political stripes. And when you get right down to it, the things that people care about on both sides of the aisle are the same. They might define them differently, they might name them differently. Everybody that I have talked to, Democrat, Republican, Independent, any other party, they are concerned about a job that pays well enough to put food on the table and build a better future for their kids. They are concerned about being able to get to see a doctor when they need to and making sure that their parents and their children have the medications that they need. They are concerned about sending their kids to schools that are going to prepare them for the world and knowing that those kids are coming home safe at the end of the day. That's it. That's the whole ball of wax. And if we talk to each other about that and leave all the other nonsense at the door, we are going to get to our goals a hell of a lot faster.
We have time for just one more question.
Danny, tagging on to what you just said, I'd say it's a fairly safe bet. Most of the people in this room are going to vote for you, not Katko. So it seems to me that the race will be won or lost on television ads and social media. So one of the things that is a particular gripe with me is friends of mine on both sides of the aisle who post on Facebook mainly confine it to nasty swipes at one another. They don't make reasonable points that can be argued in any rational way. It's like two people standing in a room shouting at each other. And so my question to you is a media question. How can we construct more constructive, useful, progressive posts?
Okay. One more world problem I'll solve in 60 seconds. I'm not sure that there is a great way to have constructive dialogue on social media, if you want to know the truth. I think it is very easy for people who are sitting alone at home in front of a keyboard, not looking the person they're talking to in the eye, to say all kinds of nasty things. In my experience, most people, not all people, won't say those things to your face. If they are looking at you, if they are across the table or they're standing next to you and looking at you in the eye, they're not going to say those things. Some people will. Those are not people that I'm worried about. I'm not going to have any effect on them. It's the distance and the anonymity, even though it might not be full anonymity, that social media gives us, I think, that encourages people to behave that way. And I am not convinced, I have yet to see a really effective way to change that behavior. I think the people who are going to be changed already don't do that. The people who are doing that are not going to respond to a different kind of post, I don't think. I think the answer is face-to-face conversation. Hard to do that with somebody who's in California, but if your Facebook friends live in your community and you really want to change the conversation, I'd invite them to coffee. I'd have a meeting like this of your friends who are Democrats and Republicans and independents. Make sure there are no sharp objects in the room and have a conversation. It might get ugly, and maybe it'll be the last time you do it, but my guess is it won't get ugly. It'll get heated, but people aren't gonna attack in person the way they do online. And online is important because it's a really convenient method of conversation, but I don't think good conversation happens there. I think good conversation happens in the room. It goes back to that idea of building respect and trust, right? It's really hard to do that on the computer. I think it's also why I want John Katko to do a real town hall. I want to look him in the eye when I ask him my question. I want to see his facial expression when he answers. I want to be able to feel the energy that is coming off of him, to really understand where he's coming from and what matters to him. You can't get that off a computer screen. And I think the kinds of conversations that we're having, the problems we're talking about, are so complicated. They are so nuanced, and there's so much emotional charge to them that none of that is readable, none of that will come through if we're not talking face to face. Having said that, we of course have a social media program on the campaign. Of course we communicate that way. But I'm gonna disagree with you on the idea that the race is gonna be won or lost in TV commercials. I'll tell you where the race is gonna be won or lost. It's gonna be won or lost at your front door. The way you get people to vote is not by blasting them with TV commercials. It's by knocking on their door, telling them why this race is so important to you, why you support the candidate that you're supporting, asking them what matters to them, and encouraging them to show up and vote. That's how we turn out the vote. That is, all of the research shows us that. TV does great things for name recognition, right? That's why we have to do it, because everybody knows who John Katko is because he's their congressman. People don't know who I am because I'm not. I need TV ads so people know who I am. Those TV ads are not gonna make them show up to vote for me. What's gonna do that is all of you knocking on their doors. And that's why the volunteering is so critical. That's why I said voting for your candidate of choice isn't enough. You gotta work on the campaign. We have over 1,000 volunteers on this campaign. Over 1,000 people who are committed to helping us win because they believe in what we're doing. And those 1,000 people, as you will hear soon, do things like knock on doors and make phone calls and write postcards. That's why in the primary in June, we almost doubled voter turnout over last election cycle. It is about the person-to-person contact. That's how you win, and that's what we have to bring our politics back to. That's why we've built our whole campaign around it. And while I know there are a lot of people in this district who like John Katko, and a lot of them tell me, I hear from people who like John Katko all the time. I have never heard anybody say, I can't wait to go knock on doors for John Katko. I haven't heard it once. If you show up to our office, and Josh is going to tell you about that, if you show up to our office when we are doing phone banks or we are doing Canvas launches, you will see some of the happiest, most enthusiastic, most excited people you will come across all year. In that room, getting ready to do things like call strangers up on the phone, which is a little intimidating if you've never done it, right? The energy in this campaign is so tremendous because this isn't a campaign about me. This isn't a campaign about my ideas. This is a campaign about all of us. This is a campaign about making our community better. And every single person who's working on this campaign brings that idea with them to everything that they do. And so it becomes a community project, and it's just incredible. So you gotta show up, you gotta come to a phone bank and see how much fun it is. And when you do that, I swear you will feel better about this election in this country.